but I have definitely found a home in the task force. I want to thank today's planning committee, Stephen Seo, Kevin Brenneman, and Christian Port, and particularly the task force's own Cindy Tom. We all wouldn't be here without you, Cindy. Thank you so much. I'm also really, really privileged to call the task force's newest executive director, the amazing Kierra Johnson, who we'll get to know a little bit later, a longtime friend. I'm wishing you the happiest of birthdays, Ms. Kierra, and a really lovely year to come. Today's conversation anchors all of us in both the national conversation for the LGBTQ movement, as well as the California landscape, and what this means for building a powerful intersectional movement as we move forward. We are extremely privileged, very, very lucky to have today's conversation moderated by LA's very own Lorri Jean. For nearly 25 years, Lorri has served at the helm of the LGBT Center in LA. Today, the world's largest LGBT center, a home for direct services, organizing, artistic expression, and just like a community space for so many of us in LA. I am certainly really lucky to have spent a lot of time there myself. But many of you may not know that Lorri actually is very close to the task force family, having spent 2 years as executive director of the task force before her time at the center. We're like in between. And we're really, really lucky to have her with us today, a living legend, and I'm so happy to be in your presence. Lorri, I am handing you the mic. Thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Almas. That's for your very nice words. And good afternoon, everybody. I want to thank you for joining us today for what I know is going to be a very interesting, almost an hour with our three panelists. And first, I'm enormously proud and excited to introduce our new fearless leader, Kierra Johnson. She's been the task force executive director now for a couple of months, but she spent 2 years with the organization as the deputy executive director. And we're going to hear a lot more from her over the next hour. Second, we are joined by another member of the task force team who is based right here in Southern California, Riverside to be exact, and that's Tiffany Tran, the senior legislative manager. And last, but certainly not least, Fernando Lopez. They have been a driving force behind San Diego Pride for more than 10 years. And since 2018, they have been San Diego Pride's executive director. So thanks everybody for joining us. And I'm going to start with a few questions for Kierra. Now, Kierra, this is your first appearance at a Southern California task force event since you became the top dog. So would you please tell us a little bit about yourself and what part of the task force work you are most passionate about?
Yes, thank you so much. It's so nice to be with you all. I'm a Southern girl through and through, and my grandparents live in Long Beach, so it's kind of like a second home for me. So I cannot wait to get back to my second home to be able to hang with y'all face to face and break bread and, you know, party a little bit with y'all out there. Like I said, I'm a Southern girl born in Georgia. I am the daughter of a police officer and a parent who worked for the Department of Justice. And I love to say that it is because of, not despite, who they are, that my path to fighting for equity, justice, and social change became realized. We moved around a lot as young people, and my professional beginnings were in the reproductive health and rights movement. So I spent about 20 years fighting for issues of sex education, abortion rights, bodily autonomy, the right to decide, right, what lives we were going to live and make sure people had the information and resources to determine that for themselves. And it was a really, it's funny because some people are like, that's such a huge jump to go from, I don't know, reproductive rights to LGBTQ organizing. And I'm like, are you kidding? First of all, the reproductive rights movement is full of queers. Like, it's a big, like, queer fest in that movement, believe it or not. But it's also our movements are built, right, on the same foundation, right? Self-determination, bodily autonomy, the right to love who we want, how we want, and build families that make sense, right, for us and in the communities that we're in. So it actually wasn't, it actually felt like a super seamless, easy transition into LGBTQ organizing. And actually I think my first board experience was on the task force. I got to serve as one of the task force board members under my predecessor, Ray Carey. And you know, I got bitten by the bug. And I have to tell you, after being an executive director for 10 years before coming, it meant a lot for me to figure out who I was willing to follow, right? I knew I didn't want to be an executive director right off the bat. And I knew that meant that I needed to really trust whoever the CEO or executive director was going to be. And I found that in my predecessor. And I am so lucky that I got to learn so much from her and the board. And as far as what I'm excited about at the task force, Jesus, I mean, I've been in awe of this organization since I was like a baby queer. Like, I mean, seriously, like, I mean, and it was just the volunteers creating change, the staff, like we were doing federal work and state work. And it was the first time I had seen in an organization, an LGBTQ organization, right, at this level that was working on so many issues and at the intersections and working so well, holding that tension between, you know, local and national. I just fell in love with the organization. And really, what continues to attract me to it is that we are willing to lean in and occupy space in ways that, you know, other folks may be timid or uncomfortable. And so working at those intersections, building relationships with racial justice organizations, civil rights organizations, immigrant rights organizations, that is something that is our charge. And it makes me excited to take it to the next level.
Well, great. So why don't we take it to the next level and talk a little bit of political substance. 2021 has been quite a year already. In the midst of a global pandemic, a violent insurrection unfolded in our nation's capital. A few weeks later, we inaugurated not only the first Black and Southeast Asian VP, but a new president who has taken more pro-LGBTQ actions in the first 4+ months than any president in history. The Equality Act was passed by the House and sent to the Senate, where many believe it will languish this session, thanks to Republican and even some Democratic opposition. So my question for you is, how is the Equality Act different from the Employment Non-Discrimination Act that we lived with for so many years? More than 20 years it languished in Congress. And what is your assessment of its chances for passage in this session?
I appreciate that question so much, and you know, part of the work for us to do is to remind people that there is no such thing as a silver bullet piece of legislation, right? There is no one piece of legislation that we are going to be able to pass and then everything is going to be okay. We have decades of organizing. ENDA is one of those wins. Marriage is one of those wins. The Masterpiece Cake decision that meant that the government did not have, or that employers don't have a license to discriminate, right, against employees based on their sexual orientation or gender identity. Each and every one of those pieces of legislation is a step forward, right, for our community, and allows us to continue the conversation across the country and within our different communities about the importance of ending discrimination and violence, right, and the unique challenges that LGBTQ people face to being able to thrive in this country. The Equality Act is yet another piece of legislation that I think goes even a step further, in that it is a piece of legislation that is about expanding civil rights protections for all LGBTQ people, for people of color, and for women, right, throughout our 50 states, right? One of the things we know is that there are states like California that have more protections, right, than other states like Texas, for example. That's not how we live our lives, right? There's no such thing as partial equality or all equality in one state and partial equality in another state. Either you're free or you're not free. And the Equality Act and the work on the Equality Act is naming, right, that while these patchwork pieces of legislation are critical, as individuals, we do not live patchwork lives. And so we require policies and culture change that that protect our whole selves, right? Whether we are in our home state or we're going to visit grandma, right? We're visiting grandma, we're going to go pick our kids up from school, right? And so it is both a piece of legislation that is, again, subject to the entire U.S., and it's an opportunity for us to really do the cross-issue, cross-constituent, cross-movement work. Again, this piece of legislation furthers, extends, right, civil rights, the Civil Rights Act that's already on the books, which means and also applies to women in public accommodations, right? People of color in the same way. And so, again, right, this is another step forward. And I don't want us to like be Pollyanna about it. It's also not going to be the end, right? It's not going to be the end. Anyone who's done this work, all we have to do is ask civil rights leaders from 60 years ago. They're still fighting. We're still fighting for real and true equity in housing, in education, in healthcare, right? So even when we do pass this legislation, there will still be work to do to codify that in the states, but to also ensure enforcement.
So, we're living in this extreme time, or a time of extreme partisanship. And clearly it's going to take more Republican support for this bill to pass. And that takes me to you, Fernando. You've lived and been an activist in San Diego for more than a couple of decades. And San Diego is one of our more conservative big cities with a thriving LGBTQ community and a number of Republicans who support our rights. The Equality Act is going to need Republicans like that. What advice do you have for building allies in the Republican Party?
So thank you. It's a great question. And I think the biggest thing here is we got to do the real traditional organizing work. Like, there isn't an easy answer. And so much of that means stepping past our own fear to build those really intentional relationships and having those really painful, challenging conversations with folks who we might not always think of our allies. It was back in 2006 that, after years of conversations, our Republican mayor at the time, Jerry Sanders, came out publicly and it made international news. But that was other LGBT elected officials, that was community organizations and community groups, begging and pleading and having these really tough conversations. And that is with him having a lesbian daughter. And so when he came out, it was about that personal connection. And so 2 years ago, our next Republican mayor, Kevin Faulconer, came out in support of the Equality Act. And we knew for the years leading up that his next step was going to be, he wanted to run, he is currently running for the governor of California. And folks, I think, sometimes think California is so progressive and so liberal, and they don't really recognize the diversity of folks that live throughout the state of California. But again, there it was really working with institutions of faith and really having interfaith organizing at the front of that conversation as well. In San Diego, we have about just over 100 interfaith or open and affirming faith congregations. And it's about mobilizing those folks, having them have the conversations. And again, it was really deep personal one-on-one friendships and connections in addition to that work, sitting at the table with him. It was one of the founders of the Log Cabin Republicans, Susan Jester. It was having the people who were leading our interfaith organizing work sitting there, having these conversations for 2 years. And then when he finally agreed, like, I'm a crier, like I came back to my office and I wept. I was just like so moved that here was this cis heterosexual Republican man who said, you got it, I'm there. And the next week or 2 weeks later, we did a press conference with faith leaders, with business leaders, with community organizations, and the cis white Republican man calling for the passage of the Equality Act. And now this man is running for the governor of the state. So it's that long, hard work, it's relationships and interfaith organizing is how we did it here.
So Tiffany, I want to turn to you. In California, we've had virtual legal equality now for a little over 2 decades. Why should people in California care about the Equality Act? And are you seeing any apathy among Californians in fighting for this?
Yeah, Lori, that is a great question, especially knowing that the state of California, we have these protections. But I will just say first and foremost, right now, no matter where you are in the country, you should care about the Equality Act, even if you live in a state with these protections. And why you should care is because even though Lori, you, me, myself, Fernando, we're currently in California, if we just drive an easy 4 hours over to Arizona, our protections change drastically. And that's mind-blowing to think because it's a short drive, we share a state border, but the well-being of our lives are just completely different based on not only where you live, but where you currently are in the moment, where you want to go away for the weekend, where you want to go visit family at. Protections change drastically. So that being said, that should scare you and that should empower you to get involved. And that should really be the top line of why you should care about the Equality Act, no matter where you live, no matter where you are. And so I am I was happy that Kierra had said that line about patchwork lives and protections, because when I first joined the task force this past January, I remember when she said that line and it just stuck with me so hard in my brain. I wrote it down because we need to remember that these patchwork protections we currently have, they do not work. Although they are progress, they are not the solution to the well-being of our lives, because we as a whole do not live patchwork lives. And that is why patchwork protections just don't work. And so, although what we're seeing so far is progress, this is not feasible to the well-being of our lives. And it's a reminder that we are not protected until we all are protected. So a question to your apathy, Lori, a little bit, because I think you are correct that we are spoiled. When we are in California, it's a very progressive state. We have these protections at hand, but we need to remind ourselves that that is not the landscapes of the rest of the country, the whole country. Although there's other states that have those protections, I want to reemphasize that we need to continue fighting for these full protections when we all have it at that point. And so that is why we definitely should care about the Equality Act for sure.
Well, and I think we can harken back to 5 years ago when we all thought Hillary Clinton was going to be elected president, and I could see the trajectory of our movement and our rights becoming so permanently embedded in the fabric of our society. And it only took one lost election at that level. And what did Trump do? He reversed so many of our gains. So we're vulnerable until we really embed this in our whole society. I think all of us in California are vulnerable too. So Kierra, I'm going to go back to you now. And I want to ask you, with regard to our movement, what do you think are going to be the biggest challenges for our community in the next 4 years?
I believe this, and I always feel like I sound like, I don't know, like a superhero that's trying to make people believe that everything's burning to the ground. But I mean, our democracy hangs in the balance. I mean, it's a real thing. Electeds are deciding who deserves to vote. Like they're making these, like there are real decisions being made, right? Like at state levels, at municipal levels, right? Like that are creating barriers to people just participating by voting. Our legislators are deciding whether or not we get to protest. And that's like a founding fathers thing, right? Like that like our right to protest is being questioned, and there's a very particular group of people, right, that are being questioned whether or not we have the right, whether it's lawful, right, to protest. There are literal debates about whether or not your religious beliefs can dictate whether or not you provide care to someone in need. It's like literally, right? Like these are the things that are happening right on the floor of like our state legislators and in Congress. It doesn't matter whether you need care because my religion says I don't actually have to give you care. And so when I say it, I'm really not being like hyperbolic. Like it is real. It is real. And there are all kinds of reasons why people don't trust government, right, anymore, right? There are all kinds of reasons why people have started to distance themselves, right, and cede from participation, and we don't have that luxury. We don't have that luxury, and so we've got to figure out as a movement how do we continue our drumbeat, right? How do we continue engaging? How do we continue to hold electeds accountable, but at the same time, while we're continuing to move people who are already engaged, we've got to inspire a whole new, right, generation or generations, right, of people to get engaged in the fight. It's the Voting Rights Act, right, is a really great example, right? Like the reality is that people know how, right, the opposition, right, knows how to hold on to power, right? You disillusion people and tell them their vote doesn't matter. And one of the things I say over and over and over again is, if it didn't matter, then why would someone need to convince you not to do it, right? Like, why are they spending so much money, right, and time trying to figure out how to carve out your voting rights, right, if it didn't really matter? And so I think it's going to be incredibly important for organizations who do, issue-based work, who do constituency-based work, to really dig in and dive into fortifying, building, re-engaging our people in the fight for democracy, right? And really making the case and explaining like how it connects back, right, to our issues and to our constituents, right? One of the things that I thought was so powerful in this we've been doing it for many years now, but queering the census, right? Like that, the census is probably the least sexy campaign, like, or issue ever. Like no one's like, you know what I want to work on? Census, except, right? Like we spent years engaging people about what the census is, talking about the billions of dollars, right? That the census, right, dictates where that money goes and who gets that money within our communities. And when you aren't counted, you don't get money, right? And those are our people. And so we ended up making something that seemed so boring and so heady and so, right, inaccessible, interesting, right, and salient, right, and accessible and fun. And I think we've got to do more of that, whether that's redistricting or voting rights, you name it. I think we've got to double down on that.
Well, I can tell we're not going to have nearly enough time. There's so many places we could go with these questions. So I'm going to jump to Fernando. You've been an activist with the task force, active with the task force for a long time. I've been seeing you at Creating Change conferences for many years. And as a local community leader who has your own level of responsibilities for your own organization, why are you involved with the task force?
I think they started it. So I got involved. The reason many, I think, folks got involved, which was, I recognized, hey, I'm not getting treated equally, and I want to do something about it. And I think it was 2004, the task force did a power summit with our organization, Marriage Equality USA, and taught us how to do grassroots organizing. And the next thing I knew 2005, I got offered a job by Equality California, and I was a regional field director. And so my very first day on the job, going back to what Kierra said, was like knock and dragging in San Francisco for parental notification. It was like this intersectional movement, and I'll just never forget that. And I was like, oh, wait, this is a thing, and like we can work together, and we can be powerful, and we can teach each other how to build this up. And then, the task force just kept coming to my life in 2006 with the Equality for All campaign. And this is what they do, right? They drop into your community, teach generations of activists. And I will tell you that the legacy of folks who they have built from 2006 and 2008 and 2004, not all of them are still there, but so many of them are, and they're teaching more people how to be a part of the movement. And I'll even bring that to my own organization, which is like, we're San Diego Pride, we're Pride. Why is a parade and a party here, right? But 10 years ago, I got brought into this organization to turn us into a year-round education and advocacy organization. And we are that, but I owe so much of that to the task force, to sending our employees and our volunteers to creating change every year, to building up those skills, to making those connections with other activists across the country, to know that you're not alone in this work. And if you're having a problem or a challenge, somebody else has probably faced that too, and you're not alone, and someone else is going to reach out their hand and help you up and teach you how to do that. And that is what the task force has been for me for almost 20 years. That's what I think they are for everyone else. I hope folks participate in that.
Well, thank you. I completely agree with you, Fernando. I'm going to jump to Tiffany. So, you've got before you on this call an audience of task force supporters and some longtime local leaders. What do you need from us to advance your legislative work?
Yeah, that is a great question because, we're here today to talk about kind of the landscape of the LGBTQ movement. And I just want to really preface that with the task force's legislative agenda aligns directly with our values and what we want for our legislative agenda. So we've signed on to, legislation such as the Equality Act, the EACH Act, the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, the, For the People Act. And so what we need from task force supporters, not only task force supporters of constituents, but local leaders, is that we need you to reach out to your lawmakers. Reach out to your lawmakers, tell them to support federal non-discrimination protections. And I don't even need to tell you what to say other than share your story. Tell them why it's important to you. Tell this how this affects you and your loved ones and your friends and your family, because they want to hear from you. And with local leaders, I would say talk to your colleagues, talk to your network, but more importantly, talk to your community. Hear why everything we're talking about today with this lunch with Kierra on why these pieces of legislation are so important, and not even just legislation specifically, but why things like this in general matter to you and the well-being of your life. And, so I just want to reiterate that being here as a senior legislative manager, I work really closely with our policy team, especially our policy director, Liz Seaton. And we are here because we're advancing task force's mission, which is all about advancing full freedom, justice, and equality for LGBTQ people. So you'll see that our legislative agenda aligns directly with what we are fighting for, and it aligns directly with what we understand affects real people in their everyday lives. So reach out to your lawmakers, tell them to support federal non-discrimination protections, and local leaders, talk to your community and talk to your colleagues and talk to your network for sure.
Okay, now I want to turn it over to our audience. and take any questions from you. And if we don't have enough questions to keep us going, I've got plenty more that we can get into. So Cindy, are you calling on people, or how do you want to do that?
I just saw one question in the chat and I just typed
Okay.
it back in there. So we can address that one, and then folks can put their questions in the chat.
Oh, okay. So it looks like the one we have in the chat is, what does fight mean to our community? Changing hearts and minds with heartfelt pleas versus what ACT UP did for AIDS. Are we united in our approach?
I think it's all of the above, right? With any, not to be super like warmongering, but with any war, right? Any fight, it's a multiple fronts, right? And there are multiple strategies and tactics, right? It's never one tactic that's going to win the day. And I mean, for me, I also think about, like, what is our work to do, right? So that is always the first place to go. It is, what is the work that I need to do? If I'm used to having a very formal conversation with electeds, but I'm not having conversations with Uncle Ronnie, right? I'm not having a conversation with my kids. I refuse to have this conversation, at my church. Maybe that's the work for you to do, right? Like, how do you elevate and level up and push yourself? How do I push myself, right, to take up this work? And then how can we collaborate, right? Like, we don't all have to be in lockstep, but we do need to know and have our eye on the prize and be coordinating and collaborative as we're moving in that direction. Quick story, my uncle lives in Lakewood, and he's a Mormon, and randomly saw something that I did that was talking about all of the anti-trans legislation that is being passed or is being debated on the floor of legislatures. And he told my mom, he was just like, I'd never thought about this before. He's like, I learned so much. Like, it was a shift, right? His mindset shifted because a family member, right? He learned something from a family member, and he's also a very influential person in his faith community, right? Like, we don't know how far the influence and the networks go. And so for me, we need all of the above.
Okay, we have another question. How is the task force doing on diversity representation in terms of both ethnic and gender representation?
Yeah, the task force has been on a long evolution and continues to be. Our staff and board are over 50% people of color, and while representation matters, right? For us, it's about how do we continue attracting and sustaining a diversity of people across race and gender and faith, ability, ethnicity, right? How do we both honor that representation matters, but also go deeper and to ensure that how we're thinking about strategy as we're identifying who our partners are, as we're thinking about messengers and messages, right? The programs that we're doing, how do we continue to ask our question, who's missing, right? Or who isn't at the center here, right? Are all of our people here, right, in the work? And so we continue, to level up in that way. And I'm super excited that, across the organization, departments, but also in leadership, from folks who are new, to me, are also very diverse as it relates to race and ethnicity.
Well, let me ask you another question on the sort of diversity angle. You're the third woman of color to be at the helm of the task force. but I believe you are the first bisexual person to be at the helm of the task force. So how does that identity inform your leadership?
It is both exciting, and I am aware of the weight of responsibility that comes with that, right? You know, in the words of Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. And that often is true when it comes to representation. When you are the first, the level of scrutiny is high, right? Like, people are watching. And I want to do my people proud, right? Like, I want to do femmes proud. I want to do Black folks proud. I want to do Southerners proud. I want to do bi and pan folks proud, right? And again, right, it also, the responsibility for me is to not rest, right, in my identity, but to continue to push myself, right? How does white supremacy show up, right, in my leadership, right? I didn't escape white supremacy just like none of y'all did, right? So how do I own it and recognize it and create, right, networks around me that challenge me and hold me accountable? And how do we do that for each other? I hope that I inspire that within the staff and on the board, but our goal, right, is to do that as a staff for the movement.
Okay, well, I'm waiting to see if, oh, here we go. We've got a question. What specifically can we ask of our local government officials to support federal legislation like the Equality Act?
So I'll jump in really quickly, and I wanted to highlight, good question, Casey, thank you so much for asking that. I wanted to highlight Fernando's, their story about Kevin Faulconer, the Republican mayor they've had, who came out to support the Equality Act. I want to reemphasize that city politics, local politics, federal politics, it is all interconnected, right? And so your local government officials, they are paying attention to what is happening in DC and what's happening federally. And so what I would ask for you all to ask specifically of local government officials is to tell them why some pieces of legislation or why some issues are important to you, because they trickle down, and not only do they trickle down, they work their way up as well. And so when you have the Republican mayor in San Diego come out and support the Equality Act, that makes a difference. That person is a leader to their community. And even if they are a local official and they come out to support a federal law or issue, their constituents and their voters are listening. And so I would tell you to continue grassroots movements, continue organizing, continue talking to your elected officials, no matter where they are in the spectrum, no matter what level of government they are, because this all matters and this is all interconnected.
Thank you, Tiffany. Kierra, you have a really hard job, and these are challenging times. What do you perceive to be your biggest challenge as the new executive director?
I love this question, and I am so challenged by this question. I knew this question was coming, and it's like the one question I was like, maybe she won't ask it. Just being real, coffee talk, red table talk, y'all. It's a challenge, and it's, I don't think it's unique to me. I think, and I want to stay true to myself. I want to stay true to my values. I want to, it's to be in a position that is so public, right? You're constantly getting information and feedback, right? From the Twitter, right? The Facebook, from reporters, from donors, from activists, and people are telling you all kinds of things, right? So when I say being true to myself, I am such a collaborative person. And at a certain point, I've got to trust myself, right? And trust my gut, right? And lead, you know, from trusting, right, in my experience and the relationships that I have, and trusting that I'm gonna fail sometimes, and it's just gonna be okay, and that we're gonna be able to move forward, you know, without me trying to be responsive to every single opinion, right, that lands right on my heart and on my soul and on my head. And that can be really exhausting. And I do a lot to try to stay focused, right, because our community deserves it. They don't deserve me spinning out of control because, oh my God, this reporter said X about me, right? They deserve, right, a strategic, focused, collaborative person who trusts herself and her organization and her people.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, you have succeeded the task force's longest tenured executive director in its entire history, Ray Carey. And if I were going to characterize Ray's stamp on the organization, I would say that it was her focus on the intersectionality of the work. You've already talked today about that. But I wonder if, you know, given that you've spent 2 years at the task force already, and before that we're on the board, and now you're at the helm, do you have a sense of what you want your stamp on the organization to be?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, right, it's never done. And what does it look like for us as an organization to take the intersectional work to the next level, right? I really, truly believe that there is so much opportunity for us to live and work at the intersections of places people don't expect us to be, right? And yeah, I've talked to some of you about this before, but one of the campaigns that I have been so proud of is the work we did in Florida with the Second Chances campaign. And for those of you who don't know what the Second Chances campaign is, it's about restoring voting rights for returning citizens. So people who served in federal prison for felonies. In Florida, they lost their right to vote forever after that, right? You just got denied the right to vote even after you served your sentence. And it was like one of those moments where, you know, working at the intersection of prison reform and voting rights and racial justice and LGBTQ issues, there's so few people, right, working at those intersections, and us doing that work can have massive impact. One of the data points that proved to be really powerful at that time was that 40% of the women in prison identify as lesbian, bisexual, or queer. That's 40%. That changed the game in that campaign, right? It changed the face. It changed the community, right? It changed how we had to think about strategy and messengers and messages and policy, and reminding people that that's not a solidarity campaign, that's us. That's our campaign. And so continuing, you know, where my predecessors had seeded that work to deepen it, right? And, you know, and do more of that work. And then finally, the democracy work. I am all in on this, you know, the need for rebuilding and investing in our democracy. Our elected officials need to hear way more from the LGBTQ people across the country. We are so diverse and are so representative in these districts, and they have no idea. And we're growing in numbers, which means we're going to be growing in power. And I want us to be leveraging that as the task force as we move forward.
All about leveraging power. Love that.
Oh, yeah.
We have a question from another person in our audience about, can you speak to our national situation today that the Supreme Court is expected to release a decision in the coming days that could provide the first glimpses of how the 6-3 conservative majority will shape the future of LGBT rights.
That's another one of those super not sexy issues, right? Is the Supreme Court, right? It is, you are putting a spotlight, right, on our need to be working and organizing and making sure, you know, there is a diversity of judges, right? And judges who have a track record of upholding civil rights, right, for our people and others. That's exactly the kind of work that I'm talking about, right? Right now, who's working on Supreme Court issues or on judges? It's usually like constitutional law people, right? Like some democracy groups, but we're like LGBTQ groups are not doing that work. So how do we get ourselves in there and start doing that kind of organizing? But I think it also gets back to what Fernando is saying, is that, you know, these judges are people. They're people. And again, nobody is out of reach in terms of, you know, our organizing. We've got to be engaged with these folks from the time they come, right? They come out of law school, right? Like we know who they're our interns, right? They're our fellows. They're coming in as policy people, right? They're on the Hill. We've got to be engaging these folks and holding electeds accountable to really be discerning, right? And letting them know that we're watching them along the way. And it is going to have to impact. It already has, right? Which is why each and every election is so critical. We don't get to bow out. We don't get to take a bye year, right? We don't get a gap election, right? We got to be in on all of them because what's at stake is so high.
Isn't that the truth? Well, we could keep talking about these issues for many more hours, but I want to be mindful of the time. And before we close, and I'm going to turn it back over to Kierra for a few last words from her, whatever she wants to say, rather than answering all of our questions. I just wanted to make a few more comments. And today was an opportunity for us to hear from Kierra and a couple of other vital players in Southern California. And I want to thank Tiffany and Fernando for their participation today. When I was asked to moderate this virtual lunch, I was told that this was not a fundraising event. But as a former board member of the task force and as one of its former executive directors, and as a longtime queer movement CEO, I know the score. And we cannot do this vital work that needs to be done without money. The task force is our movement's oldest and most progressive national voice. They need our financial support to do all that they need to do. And I want Kierra to succeed beyond everyone's wildest expectations, not for the sake of the task force, but for the sake of our community and our movement. So I'm going to make an extra donation today myself, and I hope you'll consider joining me. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Kierra for any final words.
Thank you so much, Lorri. Thank you, Tiffany. Thank you, Fernando. Thank you, Callie. I'm so appreciative. I know that you all are hella busy. You like that California slang? Yeah. I know y'all are hella busy. I know you have a lot pulling on your attention and your time. And so it matters that you showed up for this today, to be with me, to be with us. I am so excited to be at the helm of this organization, and I am honored to be in community with each and every one of you. I cannot wait to get on the ground in California and see your faces. I'm looking forward to all of the work that we are going to do in this next year and these coming years. I believe that the change is upon us. Everything is telling us that. All we have to do is leverage what is already at our fingertips, and you are the people to help make it happen. So thank you so much. Cannot wait to be with you again, and have a good rest of the week.
everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.